This is Lisa Keefauver. She is a licensed therapist and runs Reimagining Grief. She's been an amazing partner to Eterneva through this time, and we just wanted to chat today and show that we're available and here for you all, and talk about grieving as a collective and how we can really show up in grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such an important conversation, I think. So I'm really excited to be here and to be joining you.
Yeah. Even just from like a mindset perspective, like today, like I remember I woke up like in anxiety and I was wearing all black and I was like, you know what, for this call, I'm going to put on some red and some red lipstick and just show that, even at home and in quarantine, you do little things to like boost things up.
Important to like, what little or big thing can you do for yourself anytime you're going through grief? There's no right or wrong. It's whatever works for you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So Lisa, if you want to kick us off, I would love to just hear from your perspective, just because you've been so grounding to us and the team before, on just some like best practices of showing up for people in grief. Since maybe for some people this is more familiar, but for a lot of us, maybe it's a newer experience.
For sure. I definitely want to talk about showing up for people and for ourselves in our grief, which is actually something I think we don't think about often. But before I do that, I think one thing I just love to ground us in right now to name, I'm sure many of you have seen, for instance, the Harvard Business Review article or other articles, but to just be naming this experience that we're going through as collective grief, I think is hugely important, just to name it. This is grief that we're going through. We are experiencing anticipatory loss, what will come, what won't come. We're experiencing this sort of at an unprecedented global scale. And I think to name all this weirdness, these feelings, this discomfort that we're all experiencing as grief is super important to do that right from the get-go, because I think it's going to help all of us feel more normalized for all of the emotions that we're not used to having that we're having right now. Right? Because I think a lot of people are probably like, I'm going crazy. What is this? Why it's not really affecting me yet? Why am I feeling bad? Right? Or you're smiling. Are you feeling like this is resonating for you?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes even I forget to like just acknowledge the moment. It's so easy to just go into your head and beat yourself up for something and be like, this is wrong. I shouldn't do this. Even though I've experienced grief before, like it always hits you as like as a new thing, and you have to kind of remind yourself. I'm smiling because I was like, thank you for reminding me. Awesome.
Sorry, you cut out there for a little bit, so I don't know. I just wanted to give you a few more grounding kind of commentary a little bit, just so that we can think about why we have a hard time showing up for each other and what kind of messages and myths we need to drop in order to be able to show up for each other better. So that's what I wanted to say. So I think one of the things that trauma or grief or loss reminds us is that we spend very little time in the present in our daily lives. And these kind of major shifts that happen for us remind us that we're spending a lot of time in our mind in sort of replaying past stories or building future stories and not being present. So I would say one way to think about these experiences is it's such a very forceful invitation for us to be present in each moment. And then the other thing I love to frame for the folks that are joining us, thanks so many people are joining us for this conversation, is the way I think about grief is our lives are basically a series of events, experiences, and we build stories, we build narratives about all of those events. And when something like a death loss happens or some major shift like what we're experiencing here in this pandemic, it's like the story of our lives, our manuscript has been shredded to gut, like just completely shredded and then handed back to us. And we're expected to know how to navigate our life. The plot has changed, our motivation has changed, our character has changed, if you want to take this sort of metaphor, to the end. And so the reason we feel brain fog and confusion and a mood swings and all of the things that we experience in grief is because we've sort of been left without direction in our lives and our stories. And so just to name that, I think that's the most important thing we can do for ourselves, and also how we can show up for compassion for other people who are experiencing grief. So I'm hopeful that that framework helps. The other thing I'll just say before we can talk about showing up is that For a lot of people, we are experiencing this collective grief. For some people, this is maybe their first real experience with grief, but the truth is 100% of us will experience death, loss, and other kinds of grief in our life. But for many people in your life, perhaps, Donnie, and in my life, they're already experiencing some other kind of grief, some other kind of, so this is cumulative. And so to be mindful for those people in your life, or if you're one of those people for yourself, that you want to show extra care and compassion and love, because these are people who are trying to grapple with multiple layers of grief, you know? So thinking about what we can do to show up for people and what maybe we don't want to do. I think a lot of the things that we don't want to do are come from sort of our cultural assumptions. Like everything has a fix in this country. That's how we believe, you know, that's sort of like how we operate in the world. And so we often try to show up for people trying to fix it, right? Like someone's sad, we want to show up, we want to have the right answer, we want to make it okay for them. And I think my invitation to all of us is grief is not something that needs to be fixed, nor can it be fixed. So if you can reframe your mind, and that goes for yourself too. So if you're feeling like, gosh darn, at least to get it together, how come I can't, you know, be happy and be positive and fix this? I think the invitation is it's not fixable and it doesn't need fixing. And that's why we need to sort of let go of that assumption and show up with, as I'd like to say, show up, shut up, and listen. This is my advice. If you want to know nothing else about how to show up for people in their grief, show up, shut up, and listen. Right?
It's such a throwback for me. I don't know if any of you like watched Princess Diaries. It was like a movie I loved growing up, and there was like that web TV show at the time, and it was like shut up and listen. And I think about it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes for ourselves too. I really want to emphasize that how we show up for other people in their grief is in the same way in which we want to show up for ourselves in our grief, which is when you hear a lot of noise in your head, like, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I should be able to go about my normal daily life, or all these kind of messages in our heads. We're kind of talking at ourselves in that same harmful way we might inadvertently talk to somebody else in our life. So those invitations really go both ways, is to remember that there is no should. Grief is something that's experienced differently by everybody. So show, you know, be so it goes for ourselves, and also just name it. Like when you're showing up for somebody, give them the space and the permission to like feel the dread and the sadness and the anger and the frustration and whatever they want to feel, and give that permission to yourself too, and resist the urge to try to get somebody to get to the happy place, to get to the positive. They'll get there.
I relate to this so hard, and I think, and what you're describing to me, and it's a nice reminder, is that idea of acceptance. And you know, like change is hard for any human to accept.
Yeah.
But we're at that stage right now where it's already happening. Change is already happening. And it's going to, you know, go on for a really long time, and probably never go back to the way we do it. So just, you know, feeling that acceptance, and you know, it's a form of both self-acceptance, and when other people hold space, it shows that they're accepting you. So that makes a lot of sense. I actually never thought about it that way until you just said that. So
yeah.
Cool.
Well, and I think, thank you. I think the acceptance now, you know, our own sense of acceptance, you know, there is sort of a stage theory, which I have mixed ideas about that. About that approach. I think it has a lot of positivity to it. I think it leads people to some false assumptions that off a list and get somewhere. And I think one thing to note about acceptance is even your sense of acceptance is going to fluctuate over time. New triggers are going to happen, new events are going to happen in the scope of a grief journey, and we're going to be kind of pulled away from that sense of acceptance. So just knowing and naming that you may get to a kind of a calm, peaceful place at some point along each of your journey, and then it'll be pulled away. And I think the other thing to normalize is change is always happening. It just takes events like this to remind us that it is. So I'd love to talk a little bit about like what are the practices we can do for ourselves and to encourage other people, given the fact that uncertainty is a fact of life. Now, this pandemic is just making visible this thing that's true always in our life. And then also that we have to sort of continually adapt to these things. I think one of the biggest things that I can encourage people to do, which I will admit myself I'm not good at, I've been working on my whole life, which is ask for help. In this country, we are taught, do it by yourself, individualism, pull yourself up by bootstraps. I don't want to burden anybody else because they're going through a hard time too. And I would say, find your people who are your people who get you and ask for help. I wrote an article a couple weeks ago for Thrive Global about my motto that I learned young, which is from becoming an early scuba diver. And it's called dive in, breathe deep, and buddy breathe when necessary. And that's really what we need to do. We need to buddy breathe. So how can we use social media, Zoom, Google Hangout, whatever, to ask for help? So I think that would be one thing. I think some other really simple things that we can do, which we can even do with our friends and our people, again, via technology, is really think about activities that allow us to stay in the present. So all of the emotions and the stress around our grief, you know, when you think about the spectrum of emotions around grief, are often valid. We're going to come back and talk about that too, like how to feel the feelings, but they're often because we're thinking about the past or we're worried, especially right now. I think there's a lot of anxiety and fear about the unknown in the future. And so whatever tricks and tools you have at your resources, and I'm going to model maybe one or two here, and I'm going to continue to model at Reimagining Grief, which is doing real mindfulness practices to allow you to stay present in this moment. We are all in a collective fight or flight mode. Our nervous systems are on overload because we're in a panic state. And what we do there is we stop breathing, or we have a really quick breath. And there's like neurobiology helps us do that, because if you need to run from a saber-toothed tiger, you know, you don't want to be like slow and whatever. You want to be like, go, 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 get the oxygen. So I think inviting people to think about noticing their breath, about extending your exhalations longer than your inhalations, really simple things. Or you all have heard this before. When you are starting to feel spinning out, when the emotions when the feels feel too much, that's what I thought. I always encourage you to feel the feels, but sometimes the feels feel too much, and you can feel it in your body. Hypochondria might be setting in, anxiety might be setting in. Do simple things like look around your room and name out loud 5 things. There's a purple computer cover. There's a pink pillow. Just getting yourself in this moment, I think, allows you to reset some of the thinking that happens. Yeah, I think
the breathing, especially, like I shared something this morning that a lot of people I think have been feeling too. And I'm sure everyone's feeling kind of this breathiness. Is you wake up sometimes like gasping for air. And it's probably because it is a new experience, and we feel closed in, we feel out of control, because really it's not in control. And we find ourselves, even during this call, you said something about exhalation. I was like I'd forgotten.
Exactly. How have we breathed yet since we've been talking? I don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. And I know people are just finding themselves grasping for air. So I think breathing, even though it's just so like simple, I've forgotten it already like 10 times today.
Yeah. I think this is people who are grieving, who also struggle with depression. How can we show up with extra compassion for them? I love that question. I can't see who asked it because it scrolled past, so I apologize. On my screen. Okay. I know who that is. Hey, Miss Tracy. Yeah, I think some of the ways we show up for people who already struggle with depression is the same sort of practices. So what is your relationship like with that person already? I think showing up for them by doing checking in, by sending acknowledgments, by giving them a sense of connection, and being mindful to be mindful, to be affirming where they're at. I think often our temptation, if we've had friends or family members who struggle with depression, is when we show up for them, we get into that fix-it mode. And so instead of really holding space and listening to what they're going through, we kind of want to go in and fix. So I think if there's ways in which we can especially join in, show up for people to just name, to acknowledge, try sort of different ways and use the kind of connections that you've already had. We have a different time now where we can't physically show up. But we can still, I do love cards. As you know, I have a line of empathy cards at Reimagining Grief. So I think we're still allowed to send cards and notes as far as I know. So sending a card that doesn't, is great. Having face-to-face contact, even if it can't be in person, is really important to show the kind of empathy and connection. So I would say to Tracy and to those of you who are asking specifically about people with depression, is showing up for people face to face. Maybe you do that with that person and say, like, I've also been really, not turning the story about you, but like, I've been having a lot of anxious feelings. Would you want to sit on a phone call with me right now and let's do a meditation together? Or something where you can be connecting and attending to people in their grief. But I'd love if other people have input that's different than that, I think that would be really important. But in some ways, I think how we show up for people is pretty universal. We want to show up with empathy and compassion. I think the other thing that might be particularly important as we show up for people is, I often talk about this, especially just in general, when we show up for people in their grief, we all have our own junk about grief. We have our own baggage. We have our own stories. Some of us don't even like to say the word dead or death or loss. And we resonate that in our body. We resonate that in our voice, even in the way we look, our body language. So before you show up for somebody, even though we can't physically show up for somebody right now in this brief window, if we're going to show up for somebody on screen, for instance, I definitely encourage each of us to settle our bodies first, because that person's going to pick up, especially a person who has struggling with depression, who's highly empathetic. They sense, we sense each other's energy. So I would say some of those practices we just talked about meditation and deep breathing or counting in the room and finding ways to be present is another really important step to take before you show up for somebody in their support. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
I think especially in times like now, like that makes a lot of sense, and it's been interesting. And I don't know, I'm curious if you, Lisa, or if you, I've been watching, like, had this experience, but there were so many relationships, I would say close relationships, friends, family, things like that. And you feel there's so much of your day-to-day in the rat race sometimes that has taken you away from them. And it's been moments like these where you force yourself to feel what's happening, acknowledge what's happening. And I've actually I've gotten closer with a lot of those people, because all of a sudden you realize, like, that is what's important. I should have invested that time in making that relationship. I should have reached out when I needed them, And
yeah.
I think that's been something really grounding about a time like this, is I was like, oh my God, these people are so important to me. The people that are important to you are the people you should be checking in with and showing up for. And I've noticed, like, this has brought, I like it because it's almost like we're consciously, like, starting to wake up to the fact that, what, we really do need these, like, meaningful connections. Even if we're not here together anymore, we realize what that actually means, giving the time, like, giving the ear, like, giving those kinds of things.
Lending an ear, I think, is super important. I'd say the other reframe I would offer to you, Donnie, and to our listeners is, I heard you use the word, and I do it all the time, so this isn't a jump on you, but I want to say, every time we hear ourselves saying the word should, about we should have been always connecting meaningfully with each other, we should have prioritized each other, we should, this is a word we use often, I'd like to try to substitute the word invitation. So I think at this time, these experiences are reminders or invitations for us to approach our relationships differently, approach our time differently, approach approach this whole thing, our emotional life differently. I also think we could think about this time as an invitation to befriend our emotions. I think we spend a lot of time, and I'm not just talking about our emotions around grief, I'm talking about all of our emotions, but especially our emotions that I'd like to call, like, or Brene Brown calls, like, the hard things, that kind of those kind of emotions. Now's the time to use this quiet space to think about becoming friends with our emotions. I use an analogy, this might be helpful. I think we often, especially in grief, and some of you guys might be experiencing this right now, is when we have a flood of emotions, especially in early grief, we feel like if we open the door, they are going to swallow us whole. And if I let a little sadness in, I'm going to be like flooded in an ocean of emotions. I remember many times after my husband died, feeling like I'm going to feel all the feels. The analogy that I like to give is think about your emotions as visitors coming over for a cup of coffee. So they're not permanent guests. They're not unpacking their bags. They're not moving in. They're not becoming your permanent roommates. Our emotions are like visitors coming over for a cup of coffee. And what we often do when we don't attend to our emotions is we're not going to open the door. But the problem is, they're sitting there on your front doorstep. They're just waiting there. Every time you look out the people, look out your window, your emotions are hanging there. And so then they become this kind of looming presence in our life that actually shape and hinder how we get to access other things like joy and delight and amazement. So if we can think about our emotions, and now's the time to practice it because we all have a little more time on our hands, as visitors coming over for a cup of coffee. What if we treated our anger or our disappointment or our sadness by inviting them in for a cup of coffee, giving them an ear, listening to what our emotions had to say to us? And you will find, I promise, they will go. None of our emotions stay, unfortunately, because I'd love like happy and joy and ecstasy and elation to stay. They don't, and neither do the hard feelings, but they have so much less power over us if we treat them as a visitor over for a cup of coffee. And I think now's the time more than ever to really practice that, because we're gonna be facing an extended grief journey here as we navigate this new uncharted territory of COVID-19. And that is the same as true for any kind of death loss. So I think that's one way to think about the kind of this emotional spectrum. I think I'm missing lots of really good questions, so I don't know if you caught some. I'm sorry.
There are so many. People love the naming, checking in with the body. It's more like this is resonating, and people agree.
Okay.
I would say, oh my God, 25 minutes have like flown by.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But I think what a good thing to leave people with is we talked about, being present, and this is a good time to be present and be present with our emotions. If you had any other, examples or something that you wanted to leave people with that they could probably do right now, even after this call, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. And I'm going to be, you guys, if you're not already, follow me on Reimagining Grief. I'm going to be leading some guided meditations over there, and I might be joining Eterneva to do some on your channel too as well. I think the thing I'd love to leave people with right now is a meditation that I'm constructing, but it's basically a mantra, and that's really about right now, and in grief in general, we operate out of, but right now in this time of COVID-19, we are operating out of a space of fear and anxiety. That's the engine that is in charge for so many of us. And so I'd love to end by inviting people to think about ways in which we can operate from a place of love. This is an invitation to us to practice empathy like no other time in our lives, and compassion. And so I'd love to, do you want to do a little quick closed eye meditation? If y'all out there want to do this, I'm going to close my eyes too, so don't know if we're still live.
Okay.
And I'm just going to say a mantra over a couple times after I get us to get into some breathing, just like maybe 2 more minutes if you want to hang with me, okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
So wherever you guys are, close your eyes, get comfortable in your seat, and just start to notice. We don't need to do anything in our breath in this moment except notice the way the air feels coming through our nose and into our chest. Can you feel it expand your belly? And as it leaves your body, relax your belly, feel the air through your chest and out your nose. Thinking about extending your exhalations longer than your inhalations. Breathing in maybe for a count of 2 and out for a count of 4. And again. This time is calling us to operate out of a place of love, to operate out of a place of compassion and empathy. We are realizing more than ever that we are a global community. We belong to one another. And so I want to invite you to repeat in your mind after me this mantra. See love, feel love, radiate love, receive love. See love, feel love, radiate love, receive love. If folks want to gently open their eyes and join us back in the room, this mantra is something that has carried me through many, many months of daily meditation. And when I start to let worry and fear and anxiety about my past or my future, when the grief feelings feel too much, if I can don't even have to create an entire meditation space, although I have one in my room. I've been standing in the line at a grocery store, which we don't get to do much anymore. You might be standing in front of your refrigerator or your cabinet. Try practicing that. See love, feel love, radiate love, and receive love. I think you will start to notice, I hope, a change in your body and being present in this moment and connecting with all of the good that exists. Yeah.
Everyone, amazing. I mean, thank you so much, Lisa, for leaving us. Oh my God, I can even feel like the change just from now. Like calm. Oh my God. So we will definitely be doing more of these.
Okay. Sounds good.
But everyone, thank Lisa so much for joining us here at Eterneva. She is at Reimagining Grief. Please go follow her. Check out her website. She has amazing empathy cards, amazing resources. I mean, just you are a source of light and inspiration. Thank you so much for guiding us through this.
Thank you.
Really, you provide a lot of value. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to all my friends and new friends, hopefully, that are joining us. I appreciate you joining us today. I look forward to staying connected with all of you. Yes.
And I just want you to know, if you didn't see the comments, people absolutely love this, seem to resonate, and you're getting a lot of hearts. So heart for us. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Carry love with you for the rest of the day, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye.